Happy Tuesday, everyone. I hope you enjoyed your long weekend. Thanks for joining us for Digital Lunchbox. Today, we're going to be talking about UTM codes and if you're tracking properly. I think we should probably just kick it off with a pretty generic question. What are UTM codes?
UTM codes are essentially just parameters that get added on to the end of a URL. If you've ever clicked an ad through Facebook and it brings you in your browser to someone's e-commerce store, if you look up in your URL bar there, chances are you're going to see all kinds of question marks and equals, and those are UTM parameters. They can also be other things, but really it breaks it down into 5 things that help us to see where traffic is originating. Those 5 things are the source, medium, campaign, term, and content. I'm gonna just share my screen really quick here to give you a visual. Can you all see this?
Mm-hmm.
Super. So this is an example of a matrix that we use to help both ourselves and our clients keep track of all of these things. But the source you'll see here, the source is where people are coming from: Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, all that jazz. The medium, it can include things like social, PPC, organic, print, email. And we've got kind of drop down set up here so that each of these values remains consistent across all of the dozens of URLs that you'll generate. On that note, consistency here is key. If you have different variants or different spellings or things like that, your data crunching on the backside of this will be a little bit of a pain in the butt. So it's really useful to help plan here.
Mm-hmm.
The campaign is kind of why folks are coming. And this would align with each of the different marketing or sales campaigns that you guys are running out there. The content is helpful for keeping track of variants. So you'll see there are different calls to action or CTAs that we're trying to keep track of within an individual piece. This is also really helpful for beyond CTAs, keeping track of AB variants, both within individual emails, but also, you know, if you have some of these things originating from, say, partner landing pages or things like that, and you've got A/B tests on those, this is a great place to differentiate that. And then the keyword, you'll see most of the time this is just a blank, and this is largely for the keyword or the term space is largely for paid or PPC ads. It'll fill in the keyword that the user searched for that resulted in the ad being shown. And that'll get passed through as well. So that's UTM codes and how we break them down.
So if that seems like that might be a little overwhelming, there's a tool that Google provides that lets you. It's a UTM Builder. And by the way, you know, I will go to that page here so that we can see this. So this is you can just Google UTM Campaign URL Builder, and you'll pretty much find this. And again, this is a tool that's offered by Google, and what it lets you do is on a one-by-one basis. It's an easy way to generate an individual UTM link. The matrix that you just saw, that Tyler just demonstrated, is a spreadsheet that, and you can find examples of those. There's lots of them around. You can, again, Google for UTM Builder spreadsheet or UTM Builder Google Sheet. There's different people who have engineered these that let you enter those things, and you really kind of set it up for mass production. But if you just want to analyze one, this is a useful way to kind of get acquainted with the format. By the way, just a sidebar, before we talk too much further about this, you might be wondering, well, UTM, why UTM? What does that actually mean? And that's actually just historical. It comes from Urchin Tracking Module. Urchin was originally the tracking company that Google acquired and folded into Google Analytics as it was building it. And they had this tracking scheme set up with these urgent tracking modules, which they then called UTM codes. And so essentially that just got folded in, and we still use that terminology to this day, talk about UTM parameters. So you can see that, and you can see that real quickly. If I go down to a typical URL that gets built, you can see right there, UTM source, UTM underscore medium, et cetera, et cetera. So let's go back up to the top and break this down and show like, where does this end up? So first of all is the website URL. This is essentially the landing page. So when you're tagging a URL, the things to keep in mind is that this is coming back to your site. It's coming back to a place where you have Google Analytics installed. If you are sending traffic someplace else, a third-party site, a partner site, it would be up to them to do that tagging, or the tagging may not be applicable, but it only works if you control the link and you are bringing them back to your property. So it's really important I can't state that, overstate that. This is where you're landing them. So let's just say we were going to, for the sake of argument, land them on the home page of the 08 site, but it could also be like, any landing page we want. It's any URL in that site. I won't bother with that. The campaign source is, again, like, where did this come from? So we can say that this campaign was on LinkedIn, and the source would be LinkedIn. If the campaign was on Facebook, it would be Facebook. If it was some type of partner newsletter, then it could easily, it could easily be something like newsletter, or it could be your own newsletter. And depending on where the traffic is coming from, the source, again, is kind of like, where are they coming from? This is where are they headed? Where are they coming from? How did they get there? This medium is super important. And you can see examples. These are three of the most common examples. CPC is used if you are paying. Generally, it means cost per click. So if you're using something like Google Ads, or you're doing paid social on Facebook or LinkedIn, you're typically going to use something like CPC. There are other ways that you can also track this. This is very arbitrary, but this is a standard, kind of a standard way that people track this medium. Again, this is how traffic is getting. So this is different. This is differentiating paid traffic. What if you posted a banner? Let's say you had an ad banner, a display ad, then you would use medium equals banner. And this is super important. If you do an email campaign, unless you've got a really good reason, your medium is always going to be email. And super important, like in a newsletter, to tag it email. So you've got source equals newsletter, medium equals email. Now, if you send out something via MailChimp or Constant Contact or whatever your email marketing program is, and those emails end up in somebody's inbox, and then they click that, if there is no link tagging, then yes, the email platform will track it, but Google Analytics will just see it as direct traffic. They won't really register it because it's not coming from another site. It's not coming through a browser. It is literally coming from an email client. And so there is no way that it knows where that traffic is coming from unless you create a tag like this. So really important if you have email traffic to tag.
On that point, Andy, MailChimp and Constant Contact both offer a little tick box that you can check that will add these parameters on for you automatically, but it's going to use a bunch of like essentially meaningless actual values here. It's really important to avoid just ticking that box because it's easy, and generating these actual links for each of your emails so that they're aligning properly with your campaign names. For instance, MailChimp is going to add the campaign name as whatever you've named that email that individual send. Whereas that email may fit into a larger drip campaign that you have running. You want the campaign name in this instance to be the name of that larger drip campaign, not the individual email that you're sending. That's where the campaign content data would be useful. So just keep in mind that while you may think that you're doing this, it's really not going to funnel the data and allow you to roll that up in a very useful way. It's going to be very disparate.
Yeah, and that's a great point about the campaign, is that one of the things that's daunting about this at first is that while there are conventions like using CPC banner, email, or newsletter, etc., I mean, those things are all kind of standard, and people use them over and over again. And obviously, when you're talking about the website URL, that's pretty well decided. It's going to be wherever you're landing that person. But when you get to campaign name, campaign term, and campaign content, you've got quite a bit of leeway. This is very open-ended. So you can think of this as, let's say that we have this example campaign, or even if I were to put something like Spring Campaign 2020, I might have 3 different campaign waves that are going out. So I really may want to use this. If I'm not doing a search campaign, I might actually want to repurpose this campaign term and do something like wave 1, wave 2, wave 3, etc., just to have some way of differentiating those. Otherwise, if I use a different campaign name for each one of those waves, that's fine. But then I am saying that it's important for me to bucket wave 1, wave 2, wave 3 under that campaign header, whereas bucketing them here at this lower level lets me roll it all up under Spring Campaign 2020. I can see all 3 waves and which one performed better for the same campaign. So it bears experimentation. This is kind of, there's both art and science to this. You don't have to. You'll notice that these are all required, but these 2 are not. These are purely optional, but they're very useful to use, particularly campaign content. So here, for example, we talked about the idea that it can be used to distinguish between 2 different types of campaigns. So let's say that one of my campaign links is going to have, or my campaign post, if this was, say, a social post on LinkedIn, maybe was going to feature an analytics dashboard image, and another one was going to feature a marketing professional. So I can differentiate here between the content that use the dashboard image and the content that use the marketing professional, and everything else can stay the same, and it will be 2 completely different links. So I have ways of differentiating my campaigns using these different parameters. And so ultimately, where do they end up? Well, they generate something that looks like this. And when you first look at these links, these URLs, it can seem very confusing, but it's essentially just taking all of the stuff that we already decided to put in and plan for, and then it's just putting them in with the parameter name. So again, here's UTM, which we already know is urchin tracking module, but nobody cares anymore. It's just something, we call it a UTM parameter. UTM underscore source equals newsletter. Why? Because that's what we built. If we change that to something else, if we make it Facebook, then it will come back down here and it will be Facebook.
Okay.
And UTM medium is email. Obviously, that's not going to be the case for a Facebook campaign, so we'll change that to social. Again, these are going to all sort of line up with one another. Newsletter and email are going to line up together. Facebook, LinkedIn are going to line up with a campaign medium with social, or possibly CPC. And when you're all done, it has built this, which you can then copy. And when you go to just go to a page here, and so all this is going to do is it's going to just simply take me to the home page of, in this case, the home page of our website with all this information. I'm not going to click it because it's going to essentially create a false situation here.
Mm-hmm.
But nonetheless, this will then, when I'm going and looking at my campaign reporting in Google Analytics, and I'm looking at source and medium, and I'm looking at campaign names and other information, it's going to take all of this and neatly break it down onto my reporting dashboard. It will be nice and clean. I won't see all this gobbledygook. I will simply see that the source was Facebook and the medium was social. And that's the beauty of using these. So that's
Well, thanks, Tyler and Andy. That was super helpful. So now I know how I create the code, but Seth, what are some ways to use UTM tracking? What's even the benefit of doing this?
Well, it's a common theme in these talks that we do. Measurement is so important. And of course, there's the organization level. You want to be organized in a series of tactics or strategies in a campaign, an overall campaign. But then you want to know how each of those strategies is playing out, or eventually returning investment, hopefully, or not. And it's good to know that too, and to fail quickly if that's the case. So that's a very high level answer. Anything else to add?
I recommend that you use these to track anything that you're any marketing, sales things that you're using to drive traffic back to your site, or any of your other web properties. You know, there's that old adage, and I'm probably going to get it wrong, that, you know, you with your marketing spend, you know which half, how does it go?
You know, half your marketing isn't working, but you never know which half.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
Yeah.
And this is a great way to nail that down and bump that closer to 75 or 80% that you know what's actually working. And all this data can funnel right back up into a larger closed loop marketing scheme as well, to help you not only on the marketing side, but then help to make informed decisions through your CRM and other things about, you know, what types of visitors and what types of content and things lead to successful conversations in the sales cycle, and which of those types of interactions and content help convert the best later on down the road.
And to some degree, one of the easiest ways to get into this and see it in action is to, in addition to just exploring the link tagging and sort of playing around with generating your own links in Google's campaign URL builder, it's, if you're doing Google ads, it's to make sure that auto tagging is enabled in Google Analytics, and then using it in Google ads in your campaigns, because Google ads will then handle all of that for you automatically. In that case, you don't have to tag anything. You don't have to insert any of these UTM parameters. It does it for you. And the beauty of that is then you see the result up front, even before you start doing the manual tagging yourself. You can see how Google ads is essentially bucketing things into the campaign based on campaign name, and the source is going to obviously be Google, and the medium is always going to be CPC, et cetera, et cetera. Or if it's a display campaign, the medium will be display. So it will break things down in a very orderly way, and it's kind of it's a way to get good first exposure to campaign tagging without actually having to go and work out an elaborate campaign tagging schema. And from there, I would say the next best thing is, as you're tagging on social and you want to consider asking the question, well, which of my social posts, forget campaigns, forget paid, just organically, I posted 3 posts in the last week on Facebook or LinkedIn, which one of these is getting me the most traffic, which of these is driving click-throughs to my site? And then so again, building tags like what we just showed in Google's tag builder, with the source is Facebook, the medium equals social, for example, or organic would also work, will allow you to track individual posts. With otherwise, it's just general referral traffic from Facebook. It won't break it down by post. And this way you can break down from Facebook or LinkedIn which post it was, which content, which image you used, or which thematic content, or even which keywords you included in your copy were responsible for getting the traffic. So that's a good next step after Google Ads, is just when you share content organically. And again, you control the content and you're bringing people back to your site, then go ahead and tag that so you can differentiate between the post that you did on Monday and the post that you did on Friday. Obviously, Facebook will tell you that in its own analytics, but it's also good to be able to see it inside your web traffic analytics on GA.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Andy. You know, like, all these social platforms are going to provide you with, especially on the paid side of things, lots of detailed analytics around each of these ads. So you may be asking, well, if I can get that data there, why do I have to, you know, take these extra steps or this hassle of creating these UTM parameters and appending those to my URLs? And the simple answer is, you know, that's not going to close the loop. Just using the basic or the vanilla tracking that the social platforms are going to provide, that's only going to get you so far. When you start building in things like your goals within Google Analytics, or starting to integrate your CRM, and think about your CRM and how those actions and the tracking that it provides funnel into that larger customer profile that you're building, these UTM parameters help to funnel data into all those other uses, so that you get a clearer picture outside of just the bubble that is Facebook, or the bubble, you know, that is Twitter.
And also, it's fair to point out that the ad platforms will count differently than Google Analytics will. Some would argue that Google Analytics is too conservative. It's based on JavaScript. It does a lot of bot filtering. It may not necessarily register every click, for example, that you get from Facebook or LinkedIn. So, you know, you could get, 300 clicks on the social platform, but maybe only 289 or 250 that get registered on Google Analytics. And it only really registers it if somebody visits and there's a session and they've determined it's not a bot. So just a caveat that the metrics that you see in Google Analytics are not necessarily going to match exactly what you see on the ad platforms, but it gives you a second, essentially a second opinion on this. And particularly if you're measuring almost everything on Google Analytics, if that's your main source of truth for whether or not your campaigns were effective and whether ultimately goals were accomplished on the website, you've set this up that someone's going to come via Facebook or via LinkedIn, and then they're going to hit your landing page, or they're going to download your ebook or watch your video or sign up for your webinar. Then ultimately, if you're tracking that on Google Analytics, you're going to have a much clearer picture of what's going on than if you're tracking it on the campaign platform, even though you can build those conversions into the campaign platform. But it's good to have one place where you're seeing everything: organic, paid, email, everything is all funneling into Google Analytics, and you have consistent tracking applied.
So Hadley, as you can see, Andy and I are very passionate about this topic, and we get really excited talking about it. But what other questions do you have for us? And maybe Seth, you can jump in here too. I'll stop talking on this next one.
We love that. I think it's super helpful. But you guys, you've continuously mentioned like a common theme is you want the big picture. You want to be able to track everything. You want all the data in one place. You really want that closed loop marketing. But what about the circumstances where maybe this long URL isn't really practical? Is there a way I can track like print pieces or other pieces of marketing? How would I go about doing that?
Well, it doesn't have to be a long URL. I mean, you can shorten it for one, and you can do that right within Google's campaign tool. And a lot of these link builders will shorten it. Also, if you put it into a social platform like LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter, they have built-in link shorteners. So you won't see this long, unwieldy looking link. When you actually go to the website, you will see it. I mean, obviously, when it expands that link out, then you will see all the parameters. So that's fine. I mean, if most sites that you visit are using these tracking parameters, and you're going to see them when you click through any news article to something that's referenced, and you'll see that the tracking is being built in. Major media outlets use it, retailers use it. Everybody is using the same set of conventions, and people are used to seeing these links. They're not freaked out by them. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you wouldn't want to put in something that's transparently, insulting, like my customer is an idiot, in one of your parameters or whatever. That wouldn't be a very smooth move, but for the most part, yeah, the link is going to be shortened in social media or wherever it is, wherever the person's encountering it, or in some cases, it's just going to be buried under the anchor text, and you're not even going to really see it until you click on it.
Speaking of, the URL parameters themselves, and this maybe gets into best practices, and we can talk about that, but if you are doing something that you don't want your competitor to see, for example, if you're tracking a certain company size, mm-hmm. You can use that Google Doc or spreadsheet index that Tyler showed at the beginning to obfuscate some of those parameters, because if you're in a really highly competitive market, your competitor, these URLs are out there, right? So it's a small subtlety, but your competitors will look at that if you're in a very competitive market. So one detail about that. Another thing to mention about the kind of siloed or bubble situation is that sometimes you're running a LinkedIn ad, so much more about those people because it's LinkedIn than Facebook. So all of a sudden you have data, retargeting audience that's super specific. So, just keeping that organized by campaign, you can then retarget to another platform, for example. So that's another thing to consider. What else about best practices are we missing? Anything else?
I really think the main thing, and we've hit on it before, is consistency. It's easy to make this up as you go. And to some degree, almost everybody starts out doing that because you're experimenting and you try something and then it works for a while. And then you realize that now you have a different perspective and you want to track a little differently. And, you know, it kind of is a bit of a moving target. So it bears, once you've got a handle on how these work and how they will appear in your reporting, it's really about how you want this to appear in your reporting, either in Google Analytics or if you're using Google Data Studio or even on the back end via your CRM, if it's HubSpot or however you're going to do that. Planning ahead and building out that matrix like Tyler showed earlier in the discussion today, where you have it built even where you use the data validation in Google Sheets, if you're familiar with that, or in Excel, to restrict what you can put in. I mean, if you're always going to use paid social for every paid post that you do on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, then you don't want to use social one time, paid another, CPC another time, and paid social. You want it to always be paid dash social. We generally would recommend connecting everything by dashes. If you leave spaces between the words, Google will build in like a %20, which is essentially a character code for a space. But there's things that can potentially break there. So we generally recommend using hyphens as one of the most common ways to do that. That's a little bit in the weeds, but it's an important, you know, sort of tip.
Yeah, I noticed that when you were screen sharing that I was going to ask if spaces were allowed. So I'm glad you addressed that.
Yeah, spaces are allowed. You won't be penalized, and in fact, it adapts pretty well to that. Again, it will build those. The %20 is just an ASCII code 32, which is the code for a blank space. But nonetheless, it's potentially error prone. So it's better if you just consciously matrix these out and think ahead about, all right, I'm doing this campaign. There are, you know, it's a drip campaign. There are 4 waves. It's all going to be email. It's going to be my newsletter. The theme is going to be, you know, I've got 4 links per newsletter and I want to track each of the links. Thinking through what you want to measure and how many waves and how the campaign is going to roll out overall in the beginning, middle, and end, and mapping that all out ahead of time and then building the URLs and having them ready is going to be a more successful approach than just sort of making it up as you go on the fly. Honestly, making it up on the fly is going to be better than not tagging at all, and it's a good way to learn. But if you're going to get real serious about marketing tracking, you want to be very intentional about how you create these UTM parameters.
The added benefit there is this really forces you to plan and structure your campaigns. Think about, you know, what's important for you to be tracking, which oftentimes we find leads people to be thinking about and keeping their eye on the prize there instead of, you know, getting lost in the weeds and the details around images and, you know, language and things like that. Really keeps you focused. One thing just on the campaigns, in Andy's example, you saw that there was a 2020 in the campaign name. And there are kind of 2 different camps here. One is putting in your years to differentiate your campaigns across years. And another is to keep your campaign names and other things date-free and just use the date picker in Google Analytics to filter those things. Each one has its benefits. If you have campaigns that run consistently and there's good amounts of space in between each campaign, definitely I would recommend keeping the date out of the campaign name so that you can just use one variable and compare year over year results really easily. But if your campaigns tend to run close together, they're extended, and you know there might be some overlap, it'll definitely be important that in that scenario to include the 2020 or the year in your campaign name. And then in that scenario, you can set up a filter that's going to essentially look for just the commonality, the first part, date-free part of the campaign, but being still consistent from year to year with that campaign naming for anything you're going to want to do comparisons of. That'll be really important.
Right. Yeah, it really comes down to what's important for you to track. If you're doing newsletters and you want to differentiate between your 2019 newsletters and your 2020 newsletters, and you want to compare campaign to campaign, it might be fine to actually put the year in that, because it's like there's a beginning, middle, and end, and you're tracking it on an annual basis. But for a campaign that's going to roll forward over a couple of years or longer, it's not as important. In fact, it may be counterproductive. So again, that goes back to the intentionality of it in the campaign strategy, that you would want represented in those, that's going to play out through those UTM parameters.
Yeah, and I think either way, you know, the goal as you grow is to be consistent in your campaign naming strategy to help yourself stay organized. I think we're at time. Hadley,
I think
anything
that was
else?
super useful, you guys. And obviously, this is something we could talk about forever. And it's pretty technical and complex. But if you're just starting to dive into your tracking, into your UTM codes, please feel free to reach out with any questions. We can help you implement those best practices and definitely give you some more information. So with that, we'll be back here on Friday. Thanks, everyone.